This week, I want to go over the Acer Nitro 5 that I ended up picking up for $550 used. This is the exact configuration I have, so same CPU, GPU, screen, RAM, and storage. Ended up testing this last week and realized that it was just crazy thermal throttled. The CPU would get up to like 105 degrees Celsius. And the fix that I ended up having in that video that was working pretty well for me was I came into the control panel, hardware and sound, power options, and then edit plan settings. And you can click on change advanced power settings. And in here, you have the processor power management. So typically you'll only have the minimum processor state and maximum processor state when you open this. But if you want to check my last video out, you can add the maximum processor frequency. So that'll let you cap your frequency at whatever you pick. And it'll also let you mess with the processor performance boost mode. So one of the things that I did was I disabled this just to see if I could get better thermals. So in this video, I've kind of realized that even though I capped my processor frequency to 3800, and that was giving me a good balance of temperature and performance in my last benchmarks, when you're actually playing for 3 or 4 hours on a demanding game, in my case it was Call of Duty Warzone, it doesn't matter that I had the processor frequency capped. The fact is that the cooling solution on this laptop does not work in this specific unit. I took it apart, I cleaned the fans, I repasted it, but none of that mattered because after a few hours of gaming, it eventually just saturates the whole heatsink, and I was still getting into like 95 plus degrees Celsius on the CPU, even with the maximum processor frequency capped out at 3800 megahertz. So I had to make a decision, and my decision was I just came down here to the processor performance boost mode, and I disabled the boost mode. So now instead of my CPU just trying to run as high as it can, it'll run at 3.2 gigahertz, and it'll just stay there. So overall, the performance is a little bit of a hit, but I think it's going to be worth it for the longevity of this system. I see this laptop as kind of a good learning experience because this is a perfect example of a CPU bottleneck. This laptop gets so thermally throttled that the CPU can't actually perform, and then you end up having a situation where the GPU has all of this horsepower it can use, and the CPU can't put through the frames to keep up with it. And a way that I'm going to demonstrate that to you is I'm going to do testing with DLSS, because I feel like sometimes people think you can just magically use DLSS and it'll just give you more performance no matter what situation you're in. And the fact is that if you are CPU limited, DLSS is not going to give you any additional frame rate because the CPU can't put through those frames, even if it is easier for the GPU to render them. So we're going to be taking a look at 4 games that are all running DLSS Ultra Performance, and the initial benchmarks are going to be 1440p DLSS Ultra Performance versus 1080p native. So basically what we're seeing is we're seeing a 1080p resolution that the GPU is 100% rendering all the frames and all the pixels, and then the other one is going to be rendering at 480p and then upscaling it to 1440p. And it's kind of also going to be a way of seeing how well the games look with DLSS 4 transformer model. So with that, let's get into the first set of benchmarks. In Call of Duty Warzone, we have the testing is with dynamic boost on, so all of these results are thermal throttled, and that's just because the CPU can't cool it well enough. And because the CPU is so limited, we see that even at DLSS Ultra Performance at 1440p, it is only a little bit faster than native 1080p in Call of Duty Warzone. Next up is Lords of the Fallen, and in this one, again, very similar results considering 1440p at DLSS Ultra Performance is rendering at 480 and then upscaling it to 1440p. The results are very similar, and you have to keep in mind that all of these games are pretty CPU limited already, so we're definitely seeing a worst case scenario here. Now we have Hogwarts Legacy, and more of the same. pretty similar results. One of the things I will say is that the DLSS 4 transformer model looks way better, even running it at DLSS ultra performance at 1440p. The game still looked great. I was running Warzone with those settings for hours, and it's definitely a good upgrade. Finally, we have Cyberpunk 2077, and again, very similar results. This is probably the game that looks the best with DLSS ultra performance, and it kind of is the poster child for DLSS for NVIDIA, but very similar between the two resolutions. And again, you'd expect to have better performance for DLSS ultra performance than we are seeing here. So when we get into the benchmark summaries, we can see that so similar, like basically the same performance across these 4 games. Again, you have to remember these games were picked specifically because they are hard on the CPU, and of all CPUs, the one in this laptop is already so thermally limited that it is the biggest bottleneck in this system. But we can see that the 1440p DLSS ultra performance is basically neck and neck with the 1080p native results, which you just wouldn't expect to see if we were not CPU limited. If we weren't CPU limited, we would expect to see much higher FPS when the game is rendering at 480p and then upscaling it to 1440p using DLSS ultra performance. Now with the second set of benchmarks we're going to do, I want to compare 4K with DLSS ultra performance, 1440p with DLSS ultra performance, and 1080p native, all of them running with the CPU boost disabled in Windows. So this is essentially how I'm probably going to use this laptop, with the CPU boost disabled. And if anything, it's going to make us even more CPU limited. So we should see basically no difference between the 4K DLSS ultra results and the 1080p native results, even though we are rendering at a significantly lower resolution. So let's get into the benchmarks. First up, we have Call of Duty Warzone. Up at the top, we have 4K DLSS Ultra Performance. This renders at 720p, upscales to 4K. Then we have 1440p DLSS Ultra Performance, rendering at 480 and upscaling to 1440p, and then native 1080p. And between all these results, they're so similar, considering we're upscaling up to 4K and then natively rendering at 1080p. Lords of the Fallen, more of the same. This one we have a little bit better on the 4K DLSS Ultra Performance, but still, they're so similar. There's just so much of a CPU bottleneck in this system that it doesn't really matter what resolution you're trying to upscale to. It's not going to really matter because the CPU is always going to be the limiting factor, not the DLSS preset. Hogwarts Legacy, again, more of the same, basically the same results. So it doesn't matter that we're rendering at 720p. It doesn't matter that we're rendering at 480p. 1080p is still going to be the exact same frame rate with the native resolution. So you can try to get performance out of a laptop that's CPU limited, but you can't really do a whole lot about it. Cyberpunk 2077, more of the same again. It's just very similar. This one we end up seeing a little bit worse in the 0.1% lows for the native resolution, but that could just be a part of the game where the GPU ended up being the bottleneck for a little bit and then ended up lowering the overall results in my 3-run benchmark passes. In the benchmark summary, we see that everything is very similar. Again, we're not running dynamic boost. We have the RAM upgrade with the 32 gigabyte CL34, and we're seeing pretty much identical results across the games and across these presets. So to me, this is just very clear cut and obvious that in these games, you are so CPU limited, it doesn't matter what DLSS preset you use. It doesn't really matter what resolution you're going for. As long as you're using upscaling, you're going to have the CPU be the biggest hindrance to your gaming on this piece of hardware. Next week, I'm going to take a look at Windows versus SteamOS on this laptop. So I'm going to test a few games in SteamOS and then test a few games in Windows and see how they compare in their performance and see if there's any reason to have SteamOS on this laptop. Maybe somehow there's something with Windows that's causing my CPU to boost higher than it really needs to. Maybe there's something with bloat and the CPU being utilized more than it really needs to. I'm not really totally sure. I'm just going to see what the performance metrics look like between SteamOS running on the laptop versus Windows. And once I have that information, I'll be able to make a little bit more of an informed decision about what OS I want on this laptop. But that'll do it for this video, and I will see you next week.